acquire property. And there's, of course, many different ways of doing that. The best way, of course, is gift. The most common is exchange, okay, where you'll hear us talk about exchange in business all the time, that exchanges take place where I give you money for, a bicycle or whatever the case may be. That's an exchange, and that's how we acquire or trade for property. Okay? A cession is a concept by which if you have something and something gets added to it, if you bought an old car, right, and it had a title, but maybe the engine was shot, you put a new engine into it, technically the engine then would become a part of the vehicle and be yours. I heard somebody else describe it possibly as, a mother cow gives birth, and, by virtue of the calf actually belonging to that cow, which belongs to you, then the calf, of course, becomes yours as well. And so maybe that's another way to look at a cession. Through confusion, fungible assets. So that can happen, think about commodities maybe. Farmers take some grain to the elevator and it gets mixed up. Technically you become a part owner of the whole pile of grain rather than an owner of your specific portion. Adverse possession gets into, think in terms of easements maybe. And if you've been crossing property that's private property, but you've been crossing it for years, okay, and nobody stopped you. The owner knew about it. In fact, maybe he allowed you to openly, okay, and knowingly allowed you to do it, okay. But maybe the property changes hands, and the new owner isn't so interested in letting you cross that property. Okay, you may still have a property right. You may have an easement that goes with that because you have, not occupied, but you've used that property, okay? And so there may be some rights attached to that, and that's kind of one way to describe adverse possession. First possession, original possession, I guess I'm not sure what the difference is there, but think in terms of somebody that invents something or somebody that creates something. You write a song, right? You have an interest in that, okay, because you created it. You invent a new drug, new machine, whatever the case may be. It could go back to applying to, when we settled the West, you came out and you homesteaded. That could have been original possession possibly. And I've kind of already talked about those. But exchanging, right, buying, bartering, whatever. Again, contracts for real property have to be in writing. First possession, inventors, creators. What's the law? Yeah, lost property in Montana. Well, what the law says is that if the property has a value, I believe, in excess of $20, you have to make a good faith effort to find the owner. Okay, you can turn the property in to the police, and because somebody may claim it there, and if they do, it's theirs. Obviously, if they can describe it. If they don't in a certain amount of time, then you could claim possession of that because you were the finder of it, right? But yeah, you do have to make a good faith effort for things that are more than nominal value. If you find a quarter on the middle of the street, nobody's gonna require you to make a good faith effort. It would cost more to track down the person or even attempt to than the quarter was worth, right? Adverse, we kind of talked about that, right? Open and notorious, actual and exclusive. So again, using that property, maybe that property crossing, might get you an easement. It's improper. Improper doesn't necessarily mean that it's not knowingly or anything. It just means that it's not normal, I guess. Okay, that you would be using that. It's not your property. Okay, continuous and for a certain period of time. If you've only crossed it once, you're not going to get an easement, right? But if you've been doing it for 10 or 15 years, yeah, you might be deserving of that. How about eminent domain? The public's right to condemn and take property, okay, for the good of the people. It does require a fair market valuation or remuneration or payment for that. Okay, and it also has to be a physical invasion, and it has to be a loss of all economic benefit. And there's a lot of stories. There's people that can write all kinds of nasty things about eminent domain, and good things, bad things that have come from eminent domain. Cases that where eminent domain didn't come into play. And let me give you an example. We had a rancher here in Havre, and he started up an elk farm. And his purpose was he brought in hunters from out of state, and they paid big dollars to go out and shoot trophy elk, okay, that were basically raised on the guy's place. And that was good, and there was a fear of chronic wasting disease, and so voters went to the polls and voted to end, that type of a business. Okay, he claimed, and he went to court, and it went all the way to the Ninth Circuit, I believe. He claimed that was a taking of property, that he had a property right, okay, and that they took that away, and so therefore he was entitled to fair market value remuneration for the loss of those hunting rights and whatnot. And he was turned down. And the reason he was turned down throughout was that they said it wasn't a loss of all economic benefit. He still had the property, and he could go back to raising cattle on it or do other things to it. Okay, and the argument that they made is that it was much like when Prohibition came in, and owners had rights, property rights in liquor licenses and whatnot, the rights to sell booze, and those rights were taken away, and yet they received no remuneration for that either. And so lots of interesting cases. I think there's some in the book. You can look it up. There's the kilo, I think, is a question that we ask on your homework, and it's an interesting subject. And people can be very passionate about it. Again, through confusion, right, and we call that fungible assets, okay, identical assets that might get combined accidentally, and that was kind of the grain example that I gave you. Best way, of course, like I said, is by gift, and there has to be intent for a gift to take place. There has to be intent, and there has to be delivery. So they have to intend, and this is where it gets into, some difficulty sometimes with maybe older folks that are lacking the capacity or potentially lacking the capacity to make those types of decisions. Okay, and we get into a lot of legal arguments about that, about whether or not there was actual intent. Okay, delivery, there may be delivery without intent, and in that case it's not a gift. Okay, and there may be intent without delivery, and same thing. Okay. Ownership of real property. Let's come back to that for part 3.